Hilary Wainwright, co-editor of Red Pepper magazine.
Okay, comrades and friends, thanks very much. And although I come from south of the border, I feel a bit like Adam too, that I want to be part of building this project too, because when Kat said, you know, the British state is kind of nearing its end, you know, my heart leapt. And I because it's just because of you, you know, there's a sense in which, you know, I mean, the British state is quite hollow and it's quite discredited. I mean, the fact that the Cameron government was elected on only 36% or 36% of the electorate didn't vote. You know, that's, and I think he was elected on something like 24% of the vote, or the potential vote, the electorate, you know, is a sign of a very hollow democracy. And in a way, it's Scotland that's kind of, it's kind of, that's blown the whistle on it and has begun to kind of undermine those foundations that will kind of bring the whole house down. At least that's what I hope. So I make a great effort to be connected to Rick and to come. In fact, I've just come this morning from South Africa, so I'm a little bit dazed and my voice projection might be a bit weak, but I was determined to come because I just think what you're doing is so important for what the left, the democratic left across the UK and across Europe is doing. And, you know, so I want to collaborate and see how we can spread the message south of the border and push those foundations. In a way, as these walls have been constructed, I thought, wow, you know, what if institutions could be just kind of moved, you know, and sort of shuffled like this? But I'll come a bit more at the end towards alternatives. I won't be talking so much about the media. I'll be talking more about the state and particularly Parliament, because in a way the whole experience of the MPs, the majority of MPs, kind of reacting to Corbyn's electoral mandate, not electoral mandate, his mandate in the party, the fact that members, the majority of members, overwhelming majority of members, supported him. And they talk as if that was meant absolutely nothing. And you think, and so what is it about these MPs? Where do they feel their power is that leads them to be so completely impervious to party democracy? I mean, we are a party system. We're not the old sort of 18th century kind of democracy where people voted for, you know, their squire or their, you know, the kind of individual that was powerful in their community. Parties were formed as a result of democratic processes, the extension of the franchise. And so when people vote, they're voting mainly for the party. So when these MPs sort of stand on their high horse and say, you know, we've got a mandate of millions of people, you know, and and Corbyn has only got a mandate of members, you know, let alone, I mean, it was nearly 500,000. You know, that it's just not the same categories, you know, actually, you know, it is a party democracy. So those MPs, you know, are acting in a very arrogant way. Anyway, I won't go on about that now, but I wanted to look at what that revealed about Parliament, because I think it is moments when the existing power structures are being challenged that you get kind of quick photographs of the actual power structures at work. So I wanted to consider, inspired a bit, or the opposite of inspired, sort of, you know, stimulated, challenged by the Corbyn experience with the MPs, to look at that experience, and also to look at the fact that that's not new, and that when I did this Labour Party, A Tale of Two Parties, which seems somehow rather prescient now, but you know, that was in 87. Well, it was published in 87, but it was in the early 80s when there was the whole reselection process, and the reactions there, as I'll go on to say, were very much the same. So it's a structural problem we've got in the reaction of MPs to extra parliamentary struggle. And then I thought I'd quickly look at what the whole opposition to Tony Benn revealed, particularly there about, in a way, it was really not so much Westminster, it's almost like City, Whitehall, Westminster. So what was revealed there was the importance of the sort of city treasury Westminster axis. So just briefly, just maybe start with the reselection thing, because it just brings out this sort of structural problem of the dominance of Parliament, and the fact that Parliament isn't understood as about democracy, but actually about the state and the power of the state in Parliament, but I'll come on to explaining that just after describing it. So when it was in 75, there was a local party in Newham that voted to sack its MP, Reg Prentice, who was an extremely corrupt, everybody knew, he was part of the sort of East End mafia and, totally corrupt, totally reactionary. And this was widely understood. But anyway, the local constituency party there decided that, he should go. And requested him to retire at the next election. And I describe how all hell broke loose. The day before, the majority of the PLP had sent a letter to the constituency accusing the Newham party of betraying the principles of tolerance and free speech, for which our movement has also always fought when it voted to sack Prentice. And after the decision, Harold Wilson threatened at a meeting of the party's national executive that if this sort of thing continues, the PLP will have to put up its own candidates. And overnight, those who wanted Prentice to go were described as extremists, bedsit revolutionaries, members of the Trotskyist militant. Seems that's like the kind of catch-all, momentum, constituency parties in Newham. Everybody who challenges an MP is a member of the Trotskyist militant, unrepresentative of the Labour voter, and enemies of democracy. These descriptions with the term hard left added as a useful catch-all have stuck for any group in the Labour Party which challenges the established political order. So then I went in to find out who were the people that were being described in this way in Newham North East. I won't go into detail at all, but there were people like Harold Lugg, a retired milkman, and Connie Clements in her 70s, strong defender of young people joining the party. They were just ordinary Labour Party members. There might have been one young socialist who might have been a trot, but basically it was Labour Party members who just had enough of an MP who ignored them, took them for granted, and just sort of feathered his own nest. And then we have the same kind of situation with Corbyn now, that the MPs, they describe any kind of challenge as coming from Trotskyists, from militant. There's no recognition of the mass of members that are feeling that there's got to be a democratisation of the party. And you talk to MPs and they become almost sort of religious about Parliament, which is a kind of clue to what's going on. They'll say, well, Jeremy's a wonderful person, lots of integrity, a nice person. And then their voice sort of lowers and say, but you've got to remember, the Labour Party is a parliamentary party. He doesn't have the trust of his MPs, all his MPs. And thinking about this, I turned to Ralph Miliband's book. I don't know if most people here might have looked at it or read it. It's well worth reading now. It's in a way, in this kind of atmosphere where you've got a kind of level of hysteria and sort of, you've got MPs, lords sort of skipping from studio to studio, sort of, just fueling a kind of fire of inflammatory sort of attacks on Corbyn and on members. And at one level it's gossip, it's will they, won't they split, who's saying what. But at another level, it's always talked about as a fundamental issue for the future of the Labour Party. Will the Labour Party survive? And so in this atmosphere, to read his book, which is very, very elegantly written, very sort of calm, you sort of think, oh, wonderful, I must study this. And he has makes a very important distinction between sort of Parliament, seeing the need for legislation and a democratic legislature on the basis of one person, one vote, and parliamentarism. And I'll just quote, he says, the leaders of the Labour Party have always rejected any kind of political action, such as industrial action for political purposes, beyond the framework and conventions of the parliamentary system. The Labour Party has not only been a parliamentary party, it has been a party deeply imbued by parliamentarism. And I think that the key to this is the Labour Party's deference to the British state, its unwillingness, even from the very beginnings. Ralph talks about how in its founding manifesto, Labour and the New Social Order, there was no commitment to any kind of constitutional reforms that would have democratised the British state. And that sort of deference to the British state is sort of built into the Labour Party. And it's sort of encapsulated in this oath that MPs make to the Crown, which, you know, you can sort of dismiss as a bit of a joke. I mean, it links a bit to the Corbyn's unwillingness to sing the national anthem. But actually, you know, what that oath to the Crown really is, it's an oath to the state, the Crown in Parliament, in the British political system with its unfinished democratic revolution. You know, the fact that in the end the Crown was brought back. You know, okay, Charles might have been beheaded, and that sounds very radical, but in the end there was the Restoration, and the Crown had a role in Parliament, the royal prerogative, you know, the fact that war can be declared, that I think even people are talking about Theresa May is saying that she's going to use the royal prerogative to avoid a parliamentary debate about Brexit. But basically, it's a symbol of how centralised the British state is. I mean, I don't need to tell you that. And how, in a way, Parliament has got no real powers of making that state accountable. That oath to the Crown is an oath to the state. And this is what makes MPs feel powerful. They are, in effect, part of the British state. And they also have a sort of reflected glamour of royalty. You know, I don't know, my dad used to be an MP. Well, he was an MP. And I always noticed, you know, he was a wonderful guy, but he would always, when we went on walks and bumped into people, not people he knew, but just sort of local types, as it were, he would always slightly stoop, you know, like, how are you, kind of young man, you know, how's things, sort of slightly, you know, this slightly, you know, superior presumption of MPs. And I think the point about Corbyn is that he might have, well, he did make that oath, but his daily practice was always an oath to the people. I mean, any other European country, any kind of normal formally democratic country, you know, the MPs make an oath to the people. I mean, that obviously doesn't always mean much, you know, if you think about the corruption in Greece and so on. But still, it's there as a sort of formal commitment that the MPs are servants and representatives of the people. And Corbyn kind of did that in practice. You know, I think we all know that his whole way of working as an MP was all the time to be a kind of voice and champion of different struggles of the people. And now that he's been elected by the mass of members, there's that sort of commitment to that extra parliamentary voice, that extra parliamentary movement. And in a sense, his stubbornness people talk about, but actually his courage, his sort of ability to stand up to that pressure, which, you know, people who been in on parliamentary party meetings say that it's absolutely you know, appalling. You know, they just say to him at these these parliamentary meetings, you know, you're hopeless, you know, you're incompetent, just kind of a kind of bullying, really, you know, which he's withstood. But I think he's withstood it not just because he's, you know, a man of principle and courage and determination, but because he knows he's got that support from outside Parliament. He's got that commitment to representing not just party members, but people who are struggling, whether in their daily lives or on a wider public scale, people who are struggling for the kind of values that he cares for social justice, democracy, peace, and so on. And so, you know, when he, for example, symbolised by it, he went from a parliamentary party where he was just being attacked from every quarter to Parliament Square, where there were 10,000 people, 10,000 members, you know, giving him support, wishing him well, telling him to retain that commitment. And I think the other thing that's interesting is that, in a way, that oath to the state, it's kind of separates MPs from each other. I mean, you know, MPs are intensely competitive because they're sort of competing for the patronage of the state. And this has often meant that the left too is very, you know, it's quite divided, you know, it's not really a cohesive force. And what's impressive about the Corbyn sort of regime is actually how close the leadership of the Corbyn group in Parliament is, Diane Abbott, John MacDonald. Whenever you hear them talk about Jeremy, it's all kind of really supportive. It's almost like being in the women's movement, it's sort of not a competitive, sort of situation which happened. I mean, even Tony Benn, who was a wonderful, an amazing leader, but he was too very parliamentarist in a way. He kind of formally believed in popular democracy, but he also believed in Parliament, and he wasn't really a monarchist, but I've got almost the way through. Okay, so anyway, so that's enough. I mean, so there I'm talking really about the importance of Parliament as a crucial, part of the power structure. It's not a force for democracy. It's a path. It's an institution that reinforces the power of the executive, and that means also the power of multinationals, the power of the city, the power of all the extra parliamentary pressures from capital, which are completely secret and opaque, and which Parliament has got no real powers to expose and to unravel. And so the other example I was coming to, which was Tony Benn, I'll just give very briefly, but basically, he tried to carry out an industrial policy which was based on the skills and knowledge and power of working class people who he believed had the energies and the commitment to retain and build British industry in the interest of the people. He was radicalised by the occupation in UCS. That actually completely changed his life. And from then on, he was determined as minister to bring shop stewards into the state, into Whitehall, to discuss alternatives and so on. Lots of really good examples came out of that. But the civil service was absolutely beside themselves, Certainly all hell broke loose in the civil service, in the CBI and in the city. And in particular, the city worked with the Treasury to ensure that Harold Wilson got rid of him and got rid of any sort of ounce of radical strategy. So just very quickly, because I've got about 3 seconds, if that, on alternatives, which brings me to the alternative media. So, I mean, crucial, obviously, is reform of the political structures, and crucial to me, is proportional representation, to open up Parliament, to open up a party system in which the main parties are utterly devoted and deferential to the British state. And I think in England there's the beginnings of a real interest in this. At the Momentum World Transformed event at the Labour Party conference, one of the biggest sessions was on proportional representation. So I think things are moving very slowly. But in the absence of that, and in the absence of, therefore, radical parties of the left, in England at any rate, I mean, you've got a better situation here, another sign of how Scotland is the key. Then at least us in Red Pepper felt that we'd got to keep a way keep a voice, keep a kind of political movement that wasn't necessarily a party, but was a movement of debate, of ideas that was linking extra-parliamentary to parliamentary, so it was not wholly inside the Labour Party, it was outside and in social movements. So that's why we formed Red Pepper, in a sense, as a political project that saw the media, in a way, another form of representation. So taking that notion of representation as a cultural political fact, rather than only a parliamentary fact, and creating a form of media, which I'm not saying Red Pepper's like the bee's knees. We need all the allies we can get, like Open Democracy and New Internationalist. And so it's part of a sort of a radical communications infrastructure, which I think is crucial to preparing the way for the institutional change that we'd like to be like moving the walls here. But that won't happen unless there's a really powerful movement against the vested interests that we're up against. So, sorry to go on.
That's all right.